Well, hey there, you guys. Welcome back to another episode of the podcast. I am your host, Janeen, and you are listening to Becoming the CEO of Your Life. So today we are talking about the base layer of getting things done and kind of flipping productivity on its head. So I am going to be talking about this hidden layer that has to be present in order for you to become peacefully productive. I used to think that peaceful productivity was kind of the base of the triangle. It was what was necessary for getting everything else done. However, what I have learned over the last month or two is productivity actually is the opposite. Becoming peacefully productive is actually the tip of the iceberg. It is what we all want. And like I said, I used to think it was the foundation. I used to think it was the springboard into everything else, but it's not. So if you are brand new to the podcast, I want to give you a little bit of history, a little bit of backstory into what the podcast has been about, what I've been teaching on over the last 4 or 5 years. I was in the beginning, back when I started my podcast in 2018, I was talking about doing all the things. At the time, the podcast was called Vibrant Wellness for Busy Moms. And it was kind of a holistic approach to support moms in all the things that they wanted to do. Moms who were go-getters and who love to create, love to be productive, love to be involved, all the things. And so we talked about plant-based nutrition. We talked about fitness and movement and organization and productivity. And I have a background in fitness and health. And so a lot of that was playing into what it is that I was talking about. However, at some point in the game, just long story short, I had the impression that I was speaking to too many things. And so the question I asked myself was, if I could do one thing, if I could teach one thing, what would it be? And I thought, okay, in order for them to get the rest of the things done that they want to, speaking to moms, I would really speak to productivity and getting things done. Because the reasoning behind this was, I thought, if you can't make space to get it all done, how are you going to get things done, right? However, from coaching my clients, I've realized that there is actually a hidden layer underneath all of that I was actually doing in my own life, but I wasn't speaking to it because it felt so regular to me. It felt so normal to me, and I didn't even realize I was doing it. A lot of these things have been slowly creeping into my life and have been kind of hidden tools. And some of them I would talk about, like meditation and more recently speaking about nervous system regulation, because that was a new way of talking about what it was that I was already incorporating into my life. But I wasn't using it as kind of a base. However, what I've realized is so much of what we do is influenced by societal norms. What I'm talking about here is thinking like, okay, what should I be doing with my life? And looking to our peers, we're comparing ourselves to our peers, or in business, we're comparing ourselves to industry standards and believing that there is a right way to do something, or a right way to even do life, or a right way to be a good mom, right? We're watching everybody else do these things. It has an effect on us. It influences us so much so that we don't realize it unless we are very aware. And I would almost say like hyper aware of it, because it is so pervasive and it's so all over the place. It's the way that we make decisions. It's the way that we live our lives. It's the way that we interact with other people. And this is no fault of our own. This is the way that we are hardwired as human beings. We are tribal creatures. And so this matters to us. It matters to us to fit in and to do things in the way that we see other people doing things, because this means that we will be accepted and that we will belong to our tribes, right? Even if we say that it doesn't matter. I used to be kind of in this camp where I would tell people, I don't care what other people think. And it's a lie. I think to varying degrees, it affects us, right? I think some people it matters more, some people it matters less, but it matters to us. And what's interesting to me over the last months, several months, or even maybe even year or two, I have been watching how this has played out, not only in my own life, but also in the lives of my clients, because I'm intimately aware of what's going on in their life. And I was reading a book recently called Playing Big by Tara Moore. I may have mentioned this book before on the podcast. It's very interesting. And Tara Moore is a Yale graduate. She's very smart. And I really enjoyed the research that she incorporated into this book. One of the things that she mentioned, I think, in the very beginning of the book is she was noticing how interesting it was that predominantly women dominate in education. So if you're looking at professional programs, for example, like becoming a dentist or a doctor or a lawyer, the majority of these graduating classes are females, they're women. And it's not by a little margin, it's actually by a significant margin. It's like 60-40-ish. Okay, I'm throwing these out. It's been several months since I read the book, so don't quote me on any of this, but it was fascinating. It wasn't like, just a little bit. It was significant. And then when she was looking at women CEOs, so head of companies, she was noticing that the percentage of women here is actually very, very small. And she's like, how is that women are entering the workforce and they're applying to these professional programs and they are excelling and they are doing so well. And yet when it comes to actually calling the shots and running the show, there are so few women in this field. And it's like less than 10%. I want to say 7%, if I can remember correctly. Don't quote me on that, but it was very, very, very small compared to, 60%, 70%, whatever. And I thought this was fascinating because I was thinking as I was reading this book, I was like, why is that? And so she was answering these questions. And one of the things that she said was culturally or societally, we do not train our girls when they're young, our women, to be leaders in this space, to take risks and to call the shots, because we train them that there are experts that know better. Ultimately, that's kind of in a nutshell what she's saying in her book. Again, fascinating read if you want to check it out. However, from my perspective and my point of view, becoming the CEO of your life, this is very interesting to me, right? Because I want women to play a bigger leadership role in their life, not just in the businesses that they're creating, but also overall. And I'm going to give you a very minute, might seem almost insignificant example from my own life, but it is significant because this plays out in so many different layers in our lives. So back in the day, I think I've mentioned before on the podcast that I play the violin, still play the violin. I started playing the violin when I was 5. And so by the time I was in high school, I was fairly proficient at playing the violin. My mom played the violin. Music was a huge part of our household. And so I practiced. So I got pretty good. And when I was in high school, I remember my teacher telling me, who was a man, actually at the time, not that doesn't actually play a significant factor in my story, but he told me that between lessons, it would be helpful if I recorded my songs and played the recording back so that I could teach myself. And I could really start to listen to the things that he wanted me to work on. So bow transitions or even the shifts so that there was no slides or any like fidgeting around with my fingers or anything like that. And I didn't have to wait. I didn't have to wait for my lessons each week for him to tell me what I needed to work on. I could actually do that for myself. And this never dawned on me. I remember this being kind of a poignant moment in my education as a violin student because he didn't have a teacher. I mean, and even the women teachers that I had, they didn't have teachers, right? They had to learn how to teach themselves how to play the violin. And I know that, I mean, in something as technical as playing the violin, you do need help with it. However, there comes a point where you have to train yourself out of that. You have to become your own teacher, your own expert in the things that you're doing, because you do know how to listen and you do know how to fix things, whether, maybe even asking questions, right? But what I'm saying is I always relied on an expert to tell me what to do. And so this was kind of a pivotal point in my own violin playing. I mean, I practiced 100% completely differently than I did when I was a kid because I'm really listening. I'm really slowing myself down. I'm really like taking things apart. Okay, so what happens So hopefully that my example plays a part here in what you're doing and what you're thinking about, because like I said, these moments in our lives are significant. We need to learn how to lead out. What happens is we think someone else knows better than we do, and that there is a specific process and that we have to do things a certain way. And this is powerful. I want you to think about this for a moment. I have a current client. She's a one-on-one client. She's amazing. She is standing up a birthing center right now. She had this idea. And at first it was interesting how this idea kind of percolated. I think she sat on it when we were working together for like 5 or 6 months. And finally she's like, I want to create a birthing center. It was amazing. And so she's on her way to doing this. However, when she first started, she wanted to go around to different birthing centers in her area. And she lives in a pretty rural area, so it was kind of a trek. At least it was some phone calls that she wanted to make to speak to office managers and people who had these ideas to create the clinics that were already created. But what we worked on was, listen, if you're creating something that's already created, why would yours be any different? Right? And I want you to think about that, because if we are relying on experts, quote unquote experts, to tell us what to do, our own ideas, our own thinking, and the ways that we want to execute on our dreams are not being realized in the way that we want them to be manifest in the world. And this creates points of friction for us where we feel this disconnect. We start to feel uninspired by what it is that we're doing. We start to become very uncreative because that creativity is blocked. We feel like, well, I can't do it my way. I've got to do it somebody else's way. Right. And what we're doing is we are prioritizing meeting these external demands. And I'm not saying that they're loud. They're not obvious sometimes, but we're still being influenced, like I said, by what our peers are doing or what these experts are telling us, or even the societal norms that we're seeing, over staying true to our own values and our own aspirations. So for example, if we value quiet time, if we value being alone, which I value, I didn't realize I valued this until I was an adult, but if we value these things and we're constantly trying to fit in more to meet these external demands or these external expectations or societal norms, or even what we think makes us good moms, there is going to be a lot of dissonance with that. And I call it self-doubt dissonance, where we're like, oh, am I doing the right thing? This doesn't feel right. It feels off to me. And yet we still plow forward, right? With these external ideas of how we feel like we should run our lives or run our businesses, right? And what happens is our internal compass starts to become very skewed. And like I said, it leads to this disconnect between our genuine passions and the things that we so desire to create and our business efforts and all of it, to feeling this dissatisfaction to the point where we don't care. It's kind of like this apathy that starts to show up. We're not paying attention ultimately to the psychological toll that it takes to do things someone else's way, right? For us to meet these external expectations that are actually out of alignment with ourselves, which manifests itself in things like self-doubt. And it takes the joy right out of the creation process because it's not an extension of ourselves and of the dream that we have created within us. It's an extension of someone else's ideas and someone else's dreams. Okay, so you might be wondering, okay, so what's the solution for this? So in the past, I would have told you, and you probably heard me say this on the podcast if you've listened to a couple episodes, you've got to get crystal clear on what it is that you want. And that is part of it, but it's not all of it. So this is not my answer for you today. Although, like I said, it's a piece of it, but it's not, I don't feel like the base layer. There are layers beneath productivity that we need to address that will help us to kind of silence or really dim down the noise of these societal norms, or like I said, these industry standards, or the comparison game that our minds like to start to spin off in order for us to be aligned with what it is that we're doing. So this is going to help us to truly bring the fire. This is what is going to help you to bring the heart into what it is that you are doing. This is what is going to make you stand out with your message. If you're creating a business, this is what you want. You want your message to stand out, right? You want people to come to you. You want to solve the problem that you are here to solve. And it all boils down to your ability to trust yourself. So yes, what do you really want? That is part of it. But there's one layer deeper, and that is you have to be able to trust in yourself that you have an incredible vision, that you are worthy of the vision, that you don't have to struggle to get the vision, that it can actually be really fun. And there can be a lot of ease and joy in the process of bringing the vision forth. It doesn't have to struggle, even if you're doing it your own way. I'm actually going to turn off my heater right now because I am boiling. It's just going to take me a second, but I had to move away from my mic really quickly. Okay, so let me give you another example of this. One of my coaches, or one of my coaching clients who's in my group program, she is somebody that I can totally see myself in like 10 years ago. So she wants to do all the things. She homeschools her kids, and she wants them to be in a lot of different activities. And oftentimes, I know for myself, when I was doing this with my kids, it was coming from this place of not feeling good enough in my role as their mom and as their homeschooling mentor. So this experience, I felt like at home with my kids wasn't good enough for them. And so I tried to make up for it by overscheduling them, which of course creates a lot of burnout, right? So she's in this place where she feels this and she feels like she needs to cut things out, but then she wanted me to tell her what to cut out of her life. So here's the thing. I am the expert on my life. I am not the expert on anyone else's life. Thank goodness, right? So this is where self-trust comes into play. This is a very, I think, basic example of this. You have to trust your vision. So in this case, it was less is more, really, right? And what this requires of you is self-confidence, to be able to feel all of the feelings that come up when we start eliminating things from our lives, right? To be in more of an alignment of what it is that you want. You have to eliminate things, right? And it is sad for us to let things go. This is one of the emotions that came up on the call. She was really, really sad to drop some of the things that she really loved, and for the vision that she had had at one time for why she signed her kids up for these things, right? She was sad to let some of these things go. You feel vulnerable because there is this question rattling around in the back of your head, like, what if I'm wrong? What if this doesn't work out, right? We're uncertain of the future. So you have to be grounded in your own wisdom. This is where this self-trust piece comes in to play. And this is something that you could develop. This is something that you can learn how to do. And it's actually really, really fun once you start to use it and to live your life from this space. So I'm going to tell you how I cultivated this and how this came up and how I've been using this in my life for the last 10 years and how I didn't really realize that this was one of my superpowers. So back in Germany, this is, I feel like a lot of my sad origin stories happened in Germany, but if you are familiar with the story, hang tight, hang with me. I feel like it's important for me to share this again. But back in Germany, we lived in Germany. My husband's in the service. And so we lived in Germany for 4 years. And I actually started homeschooling my kids there. This was back in 2011. And Germany was a really difficult assignment. I was lonely. I was isolated. I started to become really depressed and anxious when we lived there. So much so, and this is important, so much so, I started to kind of scare myself in the things that I was thinking about. I mean, I was still with it enough to know that what I was thinking about wasn't healthy. And it started to scare me because, I mean, I am not an island, right? I have children, and I have a husband, and there are people I care about. And yet the options that I had for surviving were becoming more and more and more narrow. And my life was becoming more and more bleak. That's what it felt like to me. So I kind of hit this rock bottom moment where I realized, enough. I cannot live one more day in my head, in my headspace. I have got to find ways to be well again. And so from this space, it became very obvious and apparent that I needed to hugely and highly prioritize my own mental, emotional, and physical health. Even though I was still homeschooling 4 young kids. When we moved to Germany, my youngest was 2, my oldest was 9 at the time. And so this is, it took me about 18 months before I'm like, enough. Like, I really had to put my foot down with myself. Like, you are not going to live another day like this. You have got to, you have got to do something about this. And so I had to seriously slash my schedule. Like, no more book club, no more late nights out. You've got to go to bed at a decent time so that you can get up and, take care of yourself. At the time, I signed up for a half iron triathlon to get me out of bed, to get me out of my house to go for runs, even though there were days it was sleeting sideways. This was something that mattered to me enough that I got outside to get those like little bits of UV ray lights, and that helped me feel better because I just really struggled with the weather there. And even though it wasn't like full on sunshine like we get here in Colorado, it was enough for me to start to feel better, to start to feel strong again. So anyway, from this experience, there were a lot of things that were still trying to creep into my life and into my schedule. And I had to say no. And I've mentioned before on the podcast that this felt really awkward. It felt really clunky. And yet I'm like, no. I mean, sometimes it was like, I just really bulldozed over people, and it wasn't pretty and it wasn't gracious. I can say no very graciously now, but at the time, because I was new to it, it was, like I said, just kind of like a bull in a china shop. It was not pretty. And yet I was adamant in standing up for myself and holding that time really sacred for myself because I knew what the alternatives were. So this all boils down to me developing trust in myself. I had to be the one that advocated for me. I had to be the one that held the time available for me to get these things done that I felt like were extra. It didn't have anything to do with my family. It didn't have anything to do with, my friends or anything, even my faith. It was just kind of what I needed to do in the moment. And it had to come from my belief that I was doing what was best for me. And so, like I said, you don't have to have this rock bottom moment in order to develop self-trust. What it takes, though, is awareness. You have to be aware of what you are being influenced by, and you have to give yourself permission to do things your way. We're not used to accessing this part of ourselves. And it brings up all kinds of feels, like I mentioned on the podcast last week. Even though I'm good at trusting myself, it still feels uncertain. It still feels kind of like a fish out of water sometimes, and that's okay. Self-trust has to be at the heart of everything that you do in order for you to truly enjoy the life that you are working so hard to create. And I think the sister component of self-trust is self-confidence. Self-confidence, again, I mentioned this a little bit earlier on the show, is your ability to feel all of the emotions that come up and not be reactive to them. This is what I was doing this morning, actually, when I was going through and not only creating content for the podcast. In fact, when I woke up this morning, I'm like, I'm not sure what it is that I'm going to talk about today. And yet, here we are. I've got something for you because I was in this process of ease and in this process of giving myself permission to let certain things go. And it was interesting because I did a meditation, I did a few breathing exercises. And as soon as I did one that really opened up my heart space, I was just able to create and create and create. And it felt really, really, really good. Even though when I woke up this morning, I was feeling kind of out of sorts. I was spinning in that self-doubt. Now, I have to tell you that even though I feel like pretty good at leaning on self-trust, this is still a work in progress, right? It's not that you never feel self-doubt ever again, but like I said, you are so much better at developing awareness around how it's creeping into your life, and you're giving yourself permission to go forward, and you keep trusting yourself. You keep trusting your message. You trust yourself. You trust that you have enough time, that you're right on time, that you're not behind. Feeling like you're behind is from that cultural conditioning, right? So this is, like I said, a skill that you can develop. You have to develop this if you are going to create the freedom in your life to become joyfully and peacefully productive in the things that you're doing, in producing what you feel like your heart is calling you to create. I used to think that productivity, like I said, was the foundation. It was all about getting things done, but it's not. The foundation is self-trust. The peak of the iceberg, the icing on the cake is becoming joyfully productive, right? So when you are fueling your fire, when you're taking good care of your body and your foundation is self-trust, you're taking really good care of yourself, then your bucket is full and you can create and you can give and you can serve at your highest level. So if you are interested in figuring out what your self-trust blocks are currently, I am going to be doing productivity assessments moving forward. They're 15 minutes long. And we are going to be talking about what's specifically holding you back from creating from your highest level. We are going to assess where your self-trust blocks are coming from. So if you want to join me for this, I'm actually really excited to do these with you guys. You can go to janeenalley.com/CEO. This is not a sales call. This is a no pressure discovery call or whatever you want to call it. If I can help you, if I like you, and I feel like it's a good fit, then we can book another call to enroll you into a program that I have that, we can talk about. But if you want to find out what is holding you back, where your self-trust blocks are coming from, then go ahead and reach out to me at janeenalley.com/CEO. I feel super excited about this year. I feel like there are so many good things coming your way. And I hope that you stick around for all of it because it's going to be amazing. Building self-trust and self-confidence is truly game-changing. It literally changes everything. So, like I said, I'm really excited to be sharing this with you. Thank you again for listening. If this episode made a difference for you, please like and share, review, all of the things. All right, you guys, I will talk to you guys soon, next week, actually. All right, take care. We'll see you. Bye-bye.